Tantor Audio presents Fall Into Me by K.M. Scott, narrated by Christian Fox and Veronica Meunch. Chapter 1. Tristan. I thought you understood how this had to end. Looking down the hall at Nina's hospital room, I eyed with suspicion every person who walked in and out. Pressing the phone to my ear, I listened as the man on the other end repeated himself and added, "We've given you more than enough time, Tristan. This has to end." "I won't do it. I told you that. She's no threat to you, Carl." "You're not thinking with the right head, son. If anyone finds out about the evidence she has, everything your father worked so hard to attain will be gone. Are you prepared to let that happen? We aren't. Take care of this, or we will. She has nothing. I've checked everything she owns, and there's nothing. Let her live in peace. With you, happily ever after, like some storybook ending. I told you that we can't afford to have any loose ends. There's proof somewhere. Those of us who supported your father all those years won't be taken down by your schoolboy romantic ideas. And I told you, there's nothing to prove whatever my father was doing. He's dead, and Nina's father is dead. Let whatever happened end with them." Carl was silent for a long time. "We've told you what we want. You decide how this is going to happen, or we will." I pressed end call and stuffed my phone back into my suitcoat pocket, disgusted with Carl, but more with myself. How had I let this get so fucking far? All I had to do was find the papers Carl was sure her father had, showing what my father had done. I was still in the dark about what exactly Joseph Edwards thought he'd caught my father doing, but I didn't care anymore. Whether it was some tax scam or real estate deal gone bad, it didn't matter. All I cared about was keeping Nina safe from the likes of Carl and the other board members, who thought of nothing but protecting their own hides. "Mr. Stone?" I shook off my phone call and saw one of Nina's nurses at my side. "Yes?" "It's time for her to leave. She's all ready. Her ribs might be a little sore at first when she gets back to her daily activity, but that's to be expected. I've told her to just listen to what her body's telling her, and she should be fine. Now we just have to wait for her memory to come back." Nina appeared in the doorway of the hospital room where she'd spent the last 5 weeks. Seated in a wheelchair, she wore her black yoga pants and white sweatshirt and had the pink roses I'd given her that morning in her lap. Her blue eyes lit up when I stepped out from behind the wall. "Hey, the doctor said I'm ready to roll." Bowing deeply, I looked up at her and smiled. "Your chariot awaits, my lady." The press was out in full force when I pulled the Jag in through the gate at the bottom of the driveway I'd had installed the week before. Cameras flashed on all sides of us, making Nina bury her head in the space between our seats. Snaking my arm around her to hold her close, I hoped this first introduction to my world hadn't made her wish she'd had anywhere else to go. I leaned my head down and whispered next to her ear, "Don't worry, we'll be home in a minute, and we won't have to deal with them again, Nina." The gates closed behind us, and I raced up the driveway, wanting all that bullshit with the paparazzi left back there in the past. Fucking vultures. Like anyone should want to see pictures splattered all over the gossip pages of a man bringing a woman home from the hospital after a car accident. Nina lifted her head and sat up straight in her seat to look at the house as I stopped the car. "This is where you live?" "Where we live," I said, gently correcting her. She turned her head, and the look on her face was a mix of uncertainty and disbelief. As I shut off the car, I flashed her a smile. "Don't worry, it's cozier than it looks." "Uh-huh." She looked unconvinced. I grabbed her coat and walked around the car to help her out, watching her crane her neck to take in all of the house as I placed my black leather jacket across her shoulders. Looking up at me with those gentle blue eyes, she asked, "I really live here? With you?" Nodding, I smiled. "You do. In fact, you like this house more than the other one." She stopped walking and stared straight ahead. "There's another one?" I shrugged. "Well, it's a penthouse at the Manhattan property, but you told me you liked this one better." "Wow. First the car and now more than one house. Jordan wasn't kidding when she said you were loaded." Nina fell silent and grimaced. "Sorry, that sounded worse than I meant it to. She just said you were wealthy." "Wealthy, loaded, it's all the same. I just hope you're comfortable here." With a tiny chuckle, she said, "I can't imagine anyone couldn't be." Rogers met us at the door and bowed. Miss, it's wonderful to see you again. Nina studied him for a moment, and then smiled meekly, obviously not remembering him. Hello? Get the bags from the car, Rogers. As he passed us, she looked up at me and frowned. I guess I've met him before? I don't remember. The doctor said it could take some time. Give it a chance. Nodding, she tried to put on a brave face, but I saw in her eyes she was disappointed. I stood there staring down at her and wishing I could make things better, wishing I had the power to turn back time to before that night when she ran away, and I pressed a smile onto my lips and extended my hand toward her old bedroom, my heart heavy from the words I was about to say. Your room is right down this hall. Nina looked around the entryway and then at me, her eyes wide. It's beautiful here, Tristan. Faking enthusiasm the best I could, I said, Thanks, let's get you settled in. I gently placed my hand on the small of her back, a tiny gesture I did out of habit before I remembered for the first time that day that she and I were basically strangers in her mind. She didn't react as I kept my hand against her and escorted her to her wing of the house, and I wanted to at least believe it hadn't bothered her that I'd done it. Opening the door, she looked around in amazement at her room, her mouth hanging open, just as she'd looked the first time she saw it all those months ago. Wow, this is great! I thought maybe you were showing me to the servants' quarters or something, but this is as nice as the other part of the house. Her words cut like knives. To her, I was just some man who paid her to work for him. She had no idea how much I wanted to take her back to our bedroom on the other side of the house, the one she belonged in, the bed she belonged in, right next to me. You aren't my servant here. This is your home, Nina. I tried to disguise the hurt in my voice, but it was no use. She heard it too, and turned around from looking out the window to face me. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to say the wrong thing. I didn't mean to make it sound like you treat someone like a servant. This is all so new to me. Don't be sorry. I'll leave you to get settled in. If you need anything, I'm just on the other side of the house. I wanted to reach out to touch her hand, to take her in my arms and tell her how much I loved her, but she wasn't ready. I didn't want to scare her off. I knew I had to be patient, and hopefully, if I was, when she finally started to remember things, she'd also remember how much I loved her. My insides felt empty as I walked toward my side of the house, alone again, as I'd been for so long. I had work to do, but my heart wasn't in it. I didn't care about reporting to the board, as I had to soon, at the quarterly meeting. I didn't care about anything involving Stone worldwide. What did it matter anyway? I sat down at the desk in my room and looked out the window at the unseasonably warm December day full of sun. All I could think of was that in just over a week the date I'd chosen for our wedding would pass without mention, because she didn't remember the day held any special meaning. Nothing like the biggest day of your life going unnoticed. Tristan, I've arranged for dinner at 5, as you ordered. Something in Roger's voice told me he hadn't come to find me to talk about dinner. Closing my eyes, I leaned my head back. That's fine, Rogers, thank you. My words were met with silence, but he didn't leave. I'd avoided Rogers for weeks, knowing what he thought, but I wasn't going to escape this discussion about Nina. Opening my eyes, I turned to see him standing there, staring down at me. Is there something else, Rogers? I asked, knowing there was. I'm simply wondering what I'm to do regarding Nina. I hated the way he could refer to a human being in the same tone as he'd used to tell me he believed the gutters needed cleaning. Looking into his dark eyes, I leveled my gaze full of disgust on him. What you're to do regarding Nina? Speak plainly, Rogers. I'm not in the mood for the butler talk. You've known me since I was 5 years old, for fuck's sake. Rogers nodded his head slowly, and when he raised his gaze to meet mine again, it was one of doubt. Nothing has changed, Tristan. Your father is still the one responsible for her father's death, and you're still Victor Stone's son. The son of the man who killed Nina's father. Things are the same as they were the night she drove away from here. I didn't need Rogers to tell me all of this. None of it had ever left my mind since that day Carl had confirmed what I'd found in my father's secret files. I'd lived with the knowledge that my own father had been the architect of Joseph Edwards' murder, just as I'd have to continue living with it for the rest of my life. I don't need you to remind me of any of this, Rogers. What the fuck am I supposed to do? About what, Tristan? You can't fix what your father did. No one expects you to. I don't care about fixing anything Victor Stone did. I care about taking care of Nina. Not because of what happened to her father, but because I love her. Why is this so difficult for you to understand?" Rogers stood there staring at me, his face full of judgment. "Because you haven't loved anything or anyone since the accident." Looking away, I watched out of my window as a porcupine walked slowly across the grass. "I'm not incapable of love because of a plane crash. Are you saying you don't believe I fell in love with her?" "I have no doubt you love her and she loved you. You've been given a second chance to make things right, Tristan. If you do not, I can't see how your future with her could end any differently than it did before." "All I need is time," I mumbled, as I watched the porcupine continue to make his way across the lawn toward the trees on my side of the house. "Time for what?" "You must tell her the truth. If you don't, you'll be making the same mistake again, and the outcome will be the same as last time." Time. If I could find the evidence Carl believed existed, then Nina could be safe and never have to know about my father's heinous crime. Never have to know that I was the son of the man responsible for taking her only parent from her. Turning back to face Rogers, I stood to get to work. "Thank you, Rogers. That will be all." I saw the disapproval in his eyes as he turned to leave, but I didn't care. I wasn't going to let Nina find out the truth about her father's death. Her memory loss meant I could spare her that. It was the only good thing to come from her accident, and I intended on protecting it, no matter what. All I needed was time. At 5 o'clock, I sat in the dining room waiting for Nina so we could eat dinner together, as we had every day we'd been here in this house. I'd had Rogers instruct the cook that tonight's meal was to be duck, in the hopes that maybe having that would remind her of the time we spent together at the penthouse. I knew it was probably grasping at straws, but what else did I have? I waited for 20 minutes, watching the steam slowly fade away from the dishes before I was forced to admit that she wasn't coming. Of course she wasn't. She wasn't coming because she didn't remember that this was something we both looked forward to each day. That too was gone. Loosening my tie, I leaned my head back and closed my eyes in frustration. I couldn't go on like this. It was like being sent to a country where everyone had forgotten the language, except that one lonely soul who kept speaking even though nobody understood him, hoping one day he'd find just one other person to comprehend his words. I pinched the bridge of my nose and felt the stress ebb away for a moment. Maybe I was just kidding myself. Maybe it was time for me to forget that language too. If I could forget, I may have tried. But I couldn't. Rogers had been right when he'd said I hadn't loved anything or anyone since the accident. He was only partially correct, though. In truth, I'd never loved anyone before the accident, either. Not like I loved Nina. She was my everything. I needed her like I needed air to breathe. I doubted she'd even known how I truly felt about her before the accident. She was unlike anyone I'd ever encountered. Never before had another human being made me want so much more than the things my money could buy me. All my life, I'd been blessed with everything I could want, and it had made me hard and greedy. Nothing meant anything when you could have it at the drop of a hat. I'd learned that was one of the curses of money, but for a long time didn't care. Cars? I'd gone through dozens with not a thought about why I shouldn't. Homes? They came and went without any feeling or connection to them. Women? I could have who I wanted, when I wanted, and how. And I did. Victor Stone's money paid for whatever I desired, and it didn't matter how fucked up it was. No worries. Money can make anything happen, and then make it go away if someone chooses. I let my cock lead me to places filled with desire, sex, and whatever else I could want. It was all so easy. How often had I fucked someone merely because I could, not because I felt anything for them? It always amazed me how eager women were to please when good old Benjamin was sitting in my pocket. All it took was flashing the money clip once or twice. Running my hand through my hair, I shuddered at how many times it had only taken a few bills for me to get everything I wanted, or more, if that was what I craved. It all came so easily. The blonde, maybe her friend or two, and as much blow as I could get my hands on. Then it was just a matter of stuffing the junk up my nose and fucking as many women as I could. And it had felt so fucking good. Life was mine to enjoy, and enjoy it I did. What's that saying about life and letting the juices run down your chin? I had juices enough to last a lifetime. Then one day all the good times were gone. I was the lone survivor of a plane crash that killed my family. I'd watched my parents and twin brother die around me, listening to their agonizing cries for help and not being able to help them or myself as I waited to suffer the same fate. I was allowed to live, and what did I do with that gift? I closed myself off from the world and turned into what I'd never wanted to be, the CEO of Stone Worldwide. Shrink after shrink promised with just a little more therapy that I'd find the answer and realize life was worth living again, as if they feared at any time I was going to kill myself. What they didn't seem to understand was there was something worse than dying. Living. Having whatever your heart desired and it never being enough to overcome the emptiness that ate away at you every day and night until you felt hollow inside. Dealing with the guilt that every member of your family had been taken away and you were left like some shining monument to Darwinism, as if being alive was some achievement I'd strived for and attained. All I'd done was sit there in that plane seat. That steel bar that had plowed through my brother's heart hadn't been able to find mine, not because I was crafty or clever. It wasn't because I was lucky either. That steel rod hadn't found my heart because I didn't have one. I'd spent my entire life caring for no one enough to call it love. Why would my heart be anything to pierce, much less damage enough to kill someone like me? So I lived, a sole survivor with everything he could want, except the one thing he needed. That all changed when I met Nina. I hadn't intended on anything happening with her. I'd accepted my life alone as a punishment for all that I'd done for so many years. I didn't expect a reprieve. I didn't deserve one. All I wanted to do was try to make up for what my father had done. That she made some good come alive in me was something I wasn't ready for, but I couldn't let it go. Some small part of me was reborn that night we drove up the Taconic to this house. So now I had a choice to make. Give up or fight. I let all those times I held Nina in my arms fill me. All those times she made my heart leap with one of her gentle smiles. For someone who had never had to fight for anything, it was strangely easy. Whatever I had to go through for her, I'd endure it. Chapter 2. Tristan. Nina was sitting on her bed when I gently pushed the bedroom door open. She was doing something on her laptop, and I stood there for a moment to watch her. Her brown hair had grown much longer since she first moved here. It hung halfway down her back in soft, natural waves as she sat cross-legged and hunched over, looking at something on her computer's screen. The sweet memory of twirling those waves around my finger as she lay in my arms made an ache form in my chest as I stood there. Not wanting to scare her, I tapped on the door and quietly said her name, but she nearly jumped off the bed from fear anyway. Wincing at my clumsiness, I put my hands up to calm her. I didn't mean to frighten you, I'm sorry. I was just hoping we could talk. Shaking her head, she made her apologies. No, I'm sorry. I didn't hear you there. What's up? I wanted to talk. She closed her laptop and pushed it aside. You can sit down if you like, or would you rather talk somewhere else? What I rathered was taking her back to our room on the other side of the house and showing her all the ways I was crazy about her. Instead, I merely nodded and sat down beside her. This is a great room, Tristan. Thanks for letting me stay with you. I forced a smile at her statement, which sounded like something a long-lost relative would say to someone who wasn't thrilled about having them visit. You're welcome, but this is your home, Nina. You don't have to thank me. Lowering her head, she looked away from me. I'm sorry. I can't imagine how hard this is for you. Jordan's told me how crazy in love I was with you, and I get that. Looking up at me, she blushed. I mean, look at you. Who wouldn't be crazy in love with you? I just don't remember. But I don't want you to think that I don't want to remember. I do. Nina looked away again, her cheeks red from embarrassment. Maybe that was a good thing. At least she seemed to be attracted to me. That was something I could work with. I took her chin between my thumb and forefinger and gently turned her head to look at me. She still looked down at her hands sitting in her lap, though. Look at me, Nina, please. She lifted her beautiful blue eyes to gaze up at me, and I swallowed hard, my mouth suddenly dry and my brain devoid of all thought about what I'd planned to say. Licking my lips, I began, hoping the right words would come to me. Nina, I know this is probably a confusing time for you. Whatever I'm dealing with is nothing compared to what you're forced to deal with. I don't want to make this worse for you. If I do that, let me know. You never have to be afraid to tell me if you're uncomfortable." "Okay." "The doctors think that if you get back to your life like it used to be, you'll begin to remember what we were. We just have to make sure you take care of those ribs." Nina nodded and pressed a smile onto her pretty mouth. "My ribs feel good, so no worries. I hope that's true about remembering. I had hoped something would seem familiar here, but so far nothing." Her admission of what I already knew hurt just the same. I'd hoped coming home would stir some memories for her, too. I guess we were both disappointed. "It's okay. No hurry. We've got time." Time. If that's what we had, then I had to make the most of it. Nina put her fingers over mine and moved them from her chin. Her touch on my skin sent a rush of electricity racing up my arm, making me want more. "I do have a question. Is that okay?" I couldn't help but smile. Same old Nina, always with the questions. That was something. "Ask anything you want." She turned to grab her laptop and opened it to bring up a picture of me with one of the actresses at an event a few months earlier. As I examined the image, all I could think of was how Nina had said I looked like a statue when I was with them. I'd never truly realized it until that moment, but I did. "You seem to have a lot of girlfriends, but I can't find any pictures of me with you at these parties. Why?" I blew the air out of my lungs and struggled for the best way to explain why there were hundreds of pictures of me with other women. "They aren't my girlfriends, Nina. They're employees." "And I'm your employee?" "Yes." "So they're all like I am to you?" A groan escaped from my throat. This wasn't going well at all. "No. They're employees paid specifically to appear at events with me because I didn't have a girlfriend." Nina's eyes lit up. "Oh, so there are pictures of us together at events once we began dating? I guess I just didn't get to those." "Sure. I'm sure there are." Arching one eyebrow, she saw right through my lie. "There aren't any pictures of us, are there? Why?" "Because we only attended one event. I'm sure there are pictures, though." Her look of skepticism turned to one of hurt. "I don't understand. We were together for 6 months, and you asked me to marry you, but we only went to one event together?" I knew what she was thinking, that for some reason I wouldn't want to be seen with her like I had with the actresses. This was not going as I'd hoped. "It's a bit more complicated than that. Those women aren't in a relationship with me and get paid to deal with the press. I didn't want you to have to deal with that." Leveling her gaze at me, she asked, "And what did I want?" This was definitely the Nina I knew and loved. Smiling, I answered with the truth. "You were jealous and thought I was ashamed of you until I told you the truth about the actresses. Then you were afraid to go with me to the event we attended, but you ended up loving it. It was one of the best nights I've ever had." Her expression softened, and a smile spread across her lips. "Oh." I wanted to tell her that the sex we had on the back of the rolls had been better than any I'd ever had with any other woman. That just thinking of it was making me hard. It probably wasn't the right time, though. "I wanted to talk about you getting back to doing things you used to do. We used to do. I think it would be good for you to return to work." "That sounds good. You said I'm your private curator, right? What does that mean exactly?" "You handle choosing the artwork for the suites and penthouses in my hotels. I give you the assignments, and then you present your choices to me." A look of apprehension came over her face, and she bit her bottom lip. Was I good at this? I'd seen that look before. It was the same one she'd worn the first day I assigned her my penthouse in the city. I'd wanted to take her in my arms and kiss her that day, too. "Very good." Nina took a deep breath. "Tristan, I'm confused. I work for you as your private curator, but I'm also your girlfriend?" "Fiancé." "You loved the job, so you never mentioned wanting to stop once we began dating, and even when you said yes to my proposal." "So if I didn't want to work as your private curator anymore, you'd be okay with that?" "If that would make you happy, then I'd be fine with it." "What if I wanted a different job?" "I'm sure there's something in Stone Worldwide that would suit you." She bit her lip again. "No, I meant what if I wanted to work somewhere other than for you? I just wonder how good an idea it is to mix your business and personal life. Don't worry, I'm not, I said as casually as I could, hoping to hide how unhappy I was with where the conversation had gone. Well, then I'm not sure it's such a good idea to mix those in my life. Fuck. I had hoped it would never come to the contract again, but I saw she wasn't going to just accept things. Nina, you signed a contract obligating you to work for me. The shock at my callous words was written all over her face. For how long? The initial period was for 6 months, but there's a provision that in the event you are unable to complete the 6 months, that the contract is extended when you are able. What? How long is the extension for? 2 years. She sat there on her bed, staring at me with a stunned look for almost a minute before she finally spoke again. When she did, her words were like a sledgehammer to my chest. Her eyebrows knitted. So this is your idea of love, Tristan? I knew how all this sounded. I came off like the world's biggest dick, both in the boss and boyfriend departments. I knew that, but if I wanted to keep Nina safe, I'd have to deal with her thinking I was an ass, or worse, growing to hate me. I'd rather her hate me than be hurt by Carl and his buddies on the board. Her words hurt, though, so before I said something else that further convinced her of my asshole status, I stood to leave and repeated what I'd told her months earlier. I can give you whatever your heart desires, Nina, but I can only do it this way. What if I can't handle this way, Tristan? What happens then? Another sledgehammer to the chest, but this time I couldn't stop myself from saying something in retaliation. Then I guess you get to live rent-free and get paid an astronomical salary for picking out pictures for hotel rooms, Nina. I stared at her, knowing that was a shitty thing to say, but I didn't care. I wanted her to hurt like she'd hurt me. If the look in her eyes was any indication, I'd succeeded. Good for me. At this rate, I was going to have her speeding away in another of my goddamn cars by the end of the week. As I turned to leave the woman I loved and her new hatred for me, I wondered if maybe that was what was meant to be anyway. I needed a drink, so I made my way to the room where Nina and I had first kissed to pour myself a scotch before I headed back to my room to begin the emotional pummeling I knew I deserved. In the span of less than a day, I had screwed things up so completely that the woman I adored was likely making plans with Jordan to leave me before I even had the chance to give her a reason to stay. I let the alcohol slide down my throat and closed my eyes to enjoy it. At least drinking was working out for me. By the time my second glass was empty, I was calm enough to admit that I didn't have a choice as to whether or not this worked with Nina. Even if she hated me, she had to stay. Carl and the others weren't going to spare her, no matter how much she begged and swore she knew nothing about her father's investigation. I thought about returning to her room and apologizing, but that would have probably made it worse. No, I needed to think. I headed back to my room and relaxed on the bed. Nina's picture hung on the wall across from me, and as I stared at the blues and reds and those light brown smudges she said were my eyes watching her, I saw what I needed to do. I had to go back to the person the Shrinks and Rogers had always said would never find true love. The woman who'd painted it wanted me to be that man, no matter how much everyone else didn't. I just had to make her want me like that again. Easier said than done when the object of my affections was sitting on the other side of the house, likely planning her escape. I dozed off, staring at Nina's picture as my mind drifted back to that night at Tony's when she said yes to spending the rest of our lives together. A knock on my door roused me from my nap, and I lifted my right arm to see the time. 9:28. Scrubbing the sleep from my eyes, I walked to the door, expecting Rogers to be standing there, all dour-faced with something to report like Nina leaving again. I took a deep breath and braced myself for what he had to say as I opened the door. I just want you to know that I think keeping a woman prisoner is against the law in New York. Nina stood there in the hallway, dressed in shorts and a t-shirt, and looking incredibly pissed off. But at least she was standing there and not driving away at 100 miles an hour. That was definitely better than her leaving. You're not a prisoner. That was the second time I'd had to say that. Her right hip shot out, and her hand landed on her waist. Then what do you call this? Would you like to come in and talk? What? She asked with the same pissed-off expression that now mixed with what looked like a flash of fear in her eyes. Would you like to come in? You slept in here for months, Nina, I promise. You liked it here. Do you plan to answer my question if I come in there? Sure. I opened the door and held my arm out to welcome.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?